Right, moving on to our next major interview. Well, this fella got in trouble for a conflict of interest, and he kind of stared down, and some would say unsuccessfully, the Public Service Commission over a conflict of interest as his role as head of the country's health bureaucracy. And he said, no conflict, I should be able to get in this and say what I want. And in the end, he had to resign, or he was removed. Who cares? He's not in the job anymore as the head of Whataora. But he was arguing on principle, it seemed to me at the time, the right to be involved and to engage in public debate on issues that he thought were important. And given his background as a senior trade unionist, then someone involved in business, and having known him personally, I wasn't surprised. But Rob Campbell has not stopped being outspoken. Indeed, he seems now to be some sort of, contrarian Don Quixote, riding around various conference venues, giving speeches to anyone who'll listen about what's wrong with the bloody health system and how we have to do better in cleaning it up and fixing it. I think these are all very debatable, interesting, and indeed quite, as someone who's been recently involved, again, unfortunately, in the public health system, I think they're important things to discuss. So we are joined by video link now by, I guess, freelance S-stirrer, Rob Campbell. How are you, Rob?
I'm pretty good. I'm not sure about that introduction. At least I'm not Pancho. At least Don Quixote's got some sort of respectability about him.
All right. Yeah, look, he has. I was looking at, for instance, a speech you gave recently to a women's group or a women's conference in Auckland. You really haven't let go of this, Rob. And has your departure, removal, resignation, whatever, as a health bureaucrat, given you a freedom to say things that you, well, obviously weren't allowed to say before?
Yes, it has. A couple of things on that, Sean. I was a health bureaucrat, but I was an unwilling health bureaucrat. I don't think that the government understands its own legislation. The way the new health system is set up and is supposed to work as a Crown entity is that it has a degree of separation from the public service. It's a nonsense that directors of a Crown entity which has a degree of independence are regarded as public servants. Now, that's a ruling from the government and the Public Service Commissioner, but it's a nonsense. I mean, if you take the other people that are on that board, they all have other jobs out in the private or public sector doing other things. They don't suddenly become public servants for the whole of their life just because they've joined a Crown entity board. It's a nonsense. Now, that happens to be the legal position as I understand it, but that doesn't stop it being a nonsense. In regard to me, it's not so much that I won't let it go, Sean, as it won't let me go. I am constantly getting phone messages, text messages, emails, invitations from people within the health system who are distraught about the state that it is in and seeking some explanations of that, some advice on how they might react, sometimes just someone who will damn well listen to them. And, I don't mind doing that. It's a sort of a bit of a play it back thing that I think I've got an obligation to do. But, it certainly wasn't my intention to continue to work as hard on health issues as I currently am.
Yeah. Look, it's funny. I was in Wellington Hospital on Monday, a regular checkup, but one that didn't go quite as well as I wanted, and I was told I may have another procedure. I was talking to the young cardiologist who was the third or fourth person I saw in 2 hours. They had me on a sort of conveyor belt of doing the right things. And I said to her, gosh, every time I come here and I interact, I'm told the health system is in crisis. And I was actually thinking about some stuff of yours I'd read when I said this to her. I said, but I come here and you don't seem to be. And she said, no, believe me, we are. And she said, so when you came in for your heart op to get your stent and had your heart attack last year, she said, that particular ward is closed. And she said, it's simply closed because we haven't got enough people to run it. So she said, I know we're calm and I know we're professional, but the fact is, over time, it's shrinking. What we can offer is shrinking. Is that the problem we've got across the health sector?
Certainly in the public health system, it is. It's quite remarkable, isn't it? The health professionals and caring staff are really like ducks on a pond, aren't they? That it looks okay, but they're packed furiously underneath. So they do handle it, but it's at often significant personal cost to them from stress, but also that unseen shrinking of capability within the health services that is going on. It's been going on for some time, and it's certainly not in reverse at the moment.
Yeah. We had Des Gorman on, actually, about a year ago, I guess it would have been, very early on the platform, talking about these health reforms. And Des's line was not party political. It simply was, he said, I look at these reforms, these structural reforms, and that was the or re-centralisation. I've forgotten what part of the cycle we're in, Rob. But he said there is no measurement that we can use to say whether they're successful, and it is not readily apparent by looking at them what they are meant to achieve, except to reorganise the bureaucracy that administers health. Is our new health system, is there a point to what we've done here?
I think there are 2 or 3 points to it. One is, and there is a huge problem with lack of measurement and therefore lack of accountability in the system. One of the bases of that is the absence of good, clear, sensible data, which was sometimes collected on a different basis by different health boards. But when you got to the centre, the Ministry of Health simply did not have good, useful, accurate data on which to advise. Now, they put up with that for decades. They didn't do anything about it that I can see. And frankly, that's a disgrace for that ministry. They should all hang their heads that they were not getting good, accurate data out of the system. They were in charge of the system. They can blame the DHBs if they like, but they were in charge of it. So that's the first thing. You can't really have accountability and targets if you don't have the right data. So that's a big job for Te Whatu Ora to put in place, and I think it probably did have to be, if you like, brought into that national centre in order to achieve that. Whether it's progressing fast enough, entirely another issue. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is that there is a total mess in terms of how the non-hospital sector is organised, what we can call the primary health sector, where the huge majority of health services are delivered. They're not delivered in hospitals.
And if they're delivered properly, can have a really beneficial effect on our spend, etc., and demand at the other end, right?
Yeah, but it's a total mess. It's grown like topsy. No one's ever really properly tried to organise it, and just one anecdote will probably make it. Day before yesterday, I was with a small primary healthcare organisation, and I said, how are you going? Oh, well, we've got to renew all our contracts, so that's our biggest job. It's horrible. They had 178 different contracts with the health system.
Oh God!
And they're not a big one. So, that just illustrates it. What is the relationship between ACC and its activities and payments, and the payments that flow through Te Whatu Ora used to flow through the ministry or the DHBs? No one even addresses that. The legislation doesn't even address it. And yet ACC is such a critical issue. So there needed to be a reorganisation of that primary sector to get it all working together in a rational way, the private enterprise, the community and the state funding. Now, that was not well thought through. It was an objective of the legislation, but it wasn't well thought through or structured, and the system is totally struggling with an outcome to that. But it's an objective in the Paora legislation, just one that the thought really didn't go into. And then finally you get to the hospitals, which, there are some fantastic aspects of our hospital care. There are some that are not nearly so good. But again, the objective was to have a national public hospital system, which in a country the size of New Zealand isn't really an outstanding objective. Having a lot of different systems made no sense. And so I do think the legislation also has some sense there. But as politicians often do, they make huge promises for these things, which, I think the reform of the hospitals, if you had brilliant people running it and a free hand, would take at least a decade. It's not something you can do within a year or two, and it was oversold. And then finally, there is this thing which is, in my view, critical about the inequitable outcomes from our health services system, and applying an equity lens for Maori, for Pacific, and for increasingly migrant and other ethnicity
What about
groups.
for sick people, Rob?
Well, they are sick people, but
How
those
bad
are
is the
sick people.
inequity that you see? Give me an example.
Well, the rates, I'm not going to quote you specific statistics, so I'll get them wrong, but in most aspects of healthcare, the statistics for Maori about health outcomes and health access are substantively
Maori
worse
have
than that.
a lower, life expectancy, right? But it's going
Yes,
up.
that's right.
It's trending up. It's trending upwards, believe it or not.
Yes, it is improving, that's right.
Yeah. So I don't know
that's-
that we're not addressing inequity for Maori then, if we use
Oh,
how long you
no, I
live
don't
as
think-
the basic measurement, right?
I don't think, Sean, anyone would argue that A, it wasn't bad, or B, it wasn't improving. The issue is it improving fast enough? And there's another aspect of that which I didn't know before I got involved in the health services, is that as part of that improvement in Maori life expectancy, to take the Maori population just as a sort of lead example, the tremendous advances that have been made in what are called kaupapa Māori health services is a large part of that, and that's very much generated from Māori organisations themselves. And the interesting thing about that to me is, A, it works, and that's consistent with treatment of Indigenous populations around the world, and the research on that will improve it. So we could do more of that, and it would make a bigger improvement. But what's also interesting is what we have to learn from that in the wider society. And many users of kaupapa Māori services are not Maori. When you go around
Give me an
visit them,
example.
you don't see just the general practice kind of activity in a local Maori provider. If you go into the waiting room, you won't find everyone who's Maori. I tell the story. Here's an example. It's an anecdote, but they often work. In Hawke's Bay, I went into one of these services. There was a number of Pākehā people there, as there usually are. And I talked to one old guy and I said, "Tell me, why do you come to this?" And he said, "Rob, do you know any other doctor where they give you a cup of tea when you walk in?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, that's why I come, and that's why all my mates come here, because it's a better place. It makes me feel comfortable."
I don't know.
want to come here.
Tea,
I want to
that
get
seems to be to me a colonialist drink. That's the drink of the white oppressor.
Hey,
is a
it
cup
might
of
have been-
tea.
I didn't ask him. It might have been kawa tea.
Right. Rob, I'm getting a lot of texts from people. And I'll be honest, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. Some of them are not complimentary. And they say, Rob Campbell's got no medical experience. And he's just being bitter and egotistical that he got the bum's rush, basically. Just, if I want to give the opportunity to address that, because that's what people are coming at me with.
Yeah, look, I get a bit of that too. I'm not medical. I've never pretended to be medical. My expertise is in management and governance, and that's where I never pretended or never made a medical suggestion. So one of the faults in the structure that's been set up is that there isn't enough influence from clinicians and care workers and other workers in the health system on it. It is too top-down, too bureaucratic, too many people who don't know much about health. So I'm certainly not taking a view on any of that. It's not, other than organising how to do it. So that's the first thing. I'm not, actually getting out of the job took a load off my shoulders in many ways, Sean. I'm not bitter about it. I've got plenty of other things that I would like to be doing than talking about this, but I am being asked a lot to take up the cudgels on some things, and I don't mind doing that.
Three things. Give us three things that any government, Labor, National, ACT, heaven forfend the Greens or the Maori Party, the three things that are needed to refocus health reforms in our health system. If we want three principles, just because it's a good number.
Yeah, three's a good number. First thing is actually admitting that there is a problem and not running around trying to deny it, accepting that there is an emergency.
I'd say we're there. There's no one that doesn't think there's some sort of crisis in our health system overall, Rob. I mean, really.
Right.
Come on.
I should take you by the hand and lead you down to the Beehive or Molesworth Street.
Well, look, even those guys, they're politicians. But come on, in general, this country knows we've got issues in the health system.
Out in the real world, okay, you want your three things. The first thing I would do is you have to resolve the various payment issues that are floating around for staff and for GPs and for other providers. You simply have to get on the front foot. In the main, those are payments that will eventually be made. Yes, they're costly, but they simply will be made at some time.
Dough.
So you might as well.
That sounds like more dough. Yep. Okay.
That aspect of it is more dough.
Yep.
The second thing is that I believe that they need to do is to give a longer period of, say that they are not going to achieve the localities and other reforms within the time period in the legislation, and take the pressure off delivering those, because that is distorting decision-making within the system.
Okay, so we have aspirational strategic direction, not deadlines, which cause people to cut corners in order to achieve a deadline in a way that may not achieve the outcome you desire, right?
By saying I want to give more time, I would ally that with giving clearer targets and clearer instructions about what they are. Yeah. So that's just part of normal management outside of the public service. So that's inherent in what I say. The third thing I think that has to be done is to cut through the decision-making process within the system and take down a lot of the power of the Ministry of Health in the system and allow Te Whatu Ora to get on with making some decisions. It is currently clogged up because everything significant has to go to Molesworth Street or to the Minister's office.
Oh, so is that decentralisation when we've just had a centralisation, Rob?
Yeah, I think that was always inherent in what had to be achieved. You had to centralise some things in order to get data, in order to get control, and then, yes, you had to let people make decisions within the system. Oh. And that's the bit that the public service finds hard to do. Sure.
Yeah, they do, because they like systems, no matter how inefficient. You got the system and you know what's going on, that's the way to run it.
Yeah, well, you can't, I don't think you can run our health system that way, and you certainly can't change our health system that way.
Okay. If those are your three, let's talk broad brush goals. Is there any political party that's anywhere near to achieving those or understands those? Is it the current government? Is it National? Is it ACT? Is it the Greens? Is it Te Maori?
Not at the moment, and Sean, those things I chose, I don't see any reason at all why those are party political. I don't see there's any reason why the National Party, the Labor Party, Greens or anyone else couldn't adopt those things and we could make some progress on health. So it's one of the tragedies of what we're doing at the moment is we're arguing over a lot of the wrong things.
Yeah. How long do you keep beating this drum, Rob? How long till you feel vindicated? Or is there something else in the wings?
Oh, no, look, I don't. It's not a matter of me feeling vindicated. I don't think I will. And you know, sure, it doesn't even really matter to me personally. It matters because I care about the health of the community and the people that work within the health system. But there's no element of personal vindication for me. Why would there be? I just took on a job, just like I've taken on jobs in other companies and businesses and organisations throughout my career. So, you know, not a problem.
I know you jokingly said it in a speech that I've read a report of, but John Tamahiri hasn't invited you to join the Maori Party, has he? As a candidate?
No, he hasn't.
Don't be surprised. Stranger things have happened, Rob. But you're not going to get back into you're not going to get into active frontline politics.
No, I'm too old for that, Sean. I'm 72. I think there's enough old men.
Don't be
ageist. There's enough old men wandering around that without me getting into it.
All right. Look, I thank you for your time this morning. And as I said, I'm already getting texts now from people inside the health system that say you're actually talking some sense. So there you go. You never know. That is Rob Campbell, former head of Whata Ora. Look, professional director, business person, also once a leading light in the trade union movement in New Zealand. Talking of trade unions, I just want to say in the last 48 hours we've seen a little bit of a byplay, a bit of back and forth between the National Party and the Council of Trade Unions, which criticised National's tax plan and saying National should do this or should do that. And I see the mainstream legacy media slavishly reporting what the CTU says. Well, it's not really a story, young bum-fluff-faced journalists. The CTU is aligned with the left and with the Labour Party, so of course they're going to attack National. National just sort of told the CTU to rack off. You're a union. Of course you hate people who represent free markets and individual endeavour and success. Of course, you're basically an ersatz part of the Labour Party, of the centre or the far left. And all the journalists running around, the CTU has said they've called out the National Party on tax policy. Of course they have. They're their political opponents. Why bother making a news story about it, right? It just seems naive and silly.